Now, in exactly 1 year's time, the UK is set to cut the rope, mooring it to Europe and set sail on its own. On March the 29th, 2019, Brexit is meant to occur with a 21-month transition period afterwards. All this 2 years and 9 months after the ruling Conservative Party put the issue to a popular vote, with 51.89% of the nation saying that they want to leave the EU. Well, to give us his perspective on this, we can cross now live to Brussels and speak to the British Conservative member of the European Parliament, Charles Tannock. Mr. Tannock, thank you very much for being with us here on France 24. You've been quoted several times as being enraged by Brexit, ashamed to be British because of it. If I can quote one of your Tory colleagues in Westminster, Mr. Philip Davies MP, he's been saying that you should stand down in light of your views. What is it about this divorce that's made you so angry?
Well, of course, I regard the whole thing as being a somewhat selfish and destructive act against the European Union, which, for all its faults, remains the greatest peace, prosperity and security project in the world. And the arrogance and the kind of British exceptionalism that was demonstrated after what was, after all, a fairly narrow victory on a strange franchise which denied my British mother living in Paris, for instance, the vote, denied my European Union citizen wife the vote, and based on a whole series of false promises and lies. And we now also see possibly even manipulation of the social media via Facebook by these stories now coming out about Cambridge Analytica being involved in colluding with other Leave groups. You do wonder where the strong mandate is for such a hard Brexit. I had always hoped from the beginning that Britain would have stayed as close as possible to the European Union, stayed in the single market, stayed in the customs union. But unfortunately, Mrs May made it very clear from the beginning that Britain had to have a hard Brexit, leave the single market, leave the customs union. And the tone and the rhetoric at the beginning was very hostile, talking about go whistle for your money, Mr Boris Johnson said. Liam Fox, the International Trade Secretary, said that the European Union citizens living in the United Kingdom were the best negotiating asset, i.e. bargaining chip in the negotiations. This kind of rhetoric set a very hostile tone against the EU 27. The very fact that still the media refer to the Brexit war cabinet as if Britain was at war with its closest partners. And I think there has been a wake-up call. Clearly, Mrs May, after the Mansion House speech and also in Munich, has now tried to reset the tone to a friendlier tone, in particular after the terrible attack in Salisbury with nerve agent presumably done by Russia. She was very grateful for the solidarity shown by countries like France, Germany and most of the EU member states. And so there is a wake-up call now that perhaps the earlier tone was really unhelpful. And now, of course, Britain would like to have this deep and special partnership. But I'm very doubtful it's possible. I think given the fact that we have all these red lines, no supervision by the European Court of Justice, no freedom of movement, no long-term payments into the budget, that we are going to end up with a deal a little bit like Canada, a third country free trade deal, which won't be really good enough. And I think that the British economy will suffer. Britain will be geopolitically isolated in the world. Older people, we discover now, may not even have access to the European health insurance card, which will mean that some of them won't be able to travel. All sorts of things are coming up. Euratom, leaving Euratom, for instance, the fact that medical radioisotopes might not be able to be delivered for cancer treatment as quickly as possible. There'll be huge hold-ups at the borders. It will affect Calais in France as well as Dover. All sorts of problems are being exposed almost daily that weren't really thought about during the campaign. I made all sorts of noises during the campaign, particularly about Ireland. I'm a dual Irish-British citizen. I'm personally lucky. I I survive as an EU citizen, but that will be denied. The same rights that I will have and my children will have as dual nationals will be denied to millions of young Brits who will no longer have the freedom to move, study, work, live across the whole of the continent like my generation had. It's 44 years of working together to construct a project being untangled, and I think that's very, very sad and very distressing. And so that's why some of the rhetoric, some of the tone, some of the kind of nationalism that it has unleashed, particularly against EU citizens living in Britain, is really unacceptable. That's why I felt ashamed. I don't care what Mr. Davis has said. I'm not standing down. I'm going to stay here to complete my mandate to the end of the 5-year term I was elected for. I represent London. London voted a majority to remain. My constituents want Britain to remain in the European Union, so I am fulfilling my mandate within the European Parliament, representing those who voted to remain, and I'll keep on making the case until the very last day as an MEP here in Brussels.
Charles Tannock, the Conservative MEP there in Brussels, thank you very much for your perspective on Brexit, which is, of course, 1 year away now. The UK set to leave the European Union on the 29th of March 2019. Thank you very much.